All right. Welcome back, everybody, to another Future Focused, where we are living at the intersection of business technology and the human experience with the stated goal of trying to keep you 10 steps ahead of where things are at and also bringing some context into everything that's going on in the world. So today's topic is, I think, a super, super, super important one that is often not given the time and attention that it needs. And I think that's a growing risk as we look at technology and where it's going. So the topic in particular is really what does it look like to be over dependent on technology? And so as this technology continues to evolve, as we continue having new things, how far is too far in terms of our dependence on it, but also what are the risks associated with becoming really dependent on tech? What kind of risks are we creating for ourselves? And I think this is especially important because as we go down this path, we have a tendency to go, well, let's do it first and then look back and consider things. And we're going to talk today about what kind of risks we may be opening ourselves up to when we do this. But don't worry, this is not going to be an apocalyptic conversation about how terrible and the doom and gloom of what it is, but also kind of address, hey, there are some things that we can be doing to help mitigate these risks, because in many regards, the toothpaste is out of the tube, the train has left the station. Now we just need to kind of catch up and see what we can do to at least slow it down a bit. So to have that conversation with me, I'm joined by David Abodunrin, who is a cybersecurity program manager. And we met, David, we got connected. I don't remember how we ended up getting connected. I think it was through a PR person. And then we've been planning this conversation for a while. You're based in the UK, correct? But right now you're on holiday in Africa.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Okay.
And it's
Well,
quite
thank you.
sunny.
Thank you for spending an hour with me on your vacation. You're too kind for doing that.
Thank you so much for that. I'm excited to
And
be
so
here. Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me.
yeah, no, we're going to have a good conversation. And again, for folks watching and listening, just so you know, we will do our best to really try and break this stuff down, because I think, as you're going to see from the conversation, some of the risks right now is just a lack of awareness to the risks that are out there and how prevalent they really are. But before we get into it, David, for folks who may not know you, who have not had the chance to get to know you like I have, what is your background? How did you get into the cybersecurity space? But was it, a childhood dream that you always had? What did that look like for you?
Okay. Well, I generally, as a young child, I had very curious mind, and I've always been fascinated by technology generally. And so my first degree along those lines was about electronics computer engineering almost 2.5 decades ago. After that
Yeah.
first degree, I began to work as a young engineer, and then I was drawn into networks, fiber optics, network communication, microwave
Okay.
communication. I was involved in all of those, and then by some stroke of chance, we had a challenge where there was some. I was working with a telecoms firm, and there was some fraud. There was some billing
Okay.
fraud, a very small billing fraud, and I saw what it took. We were able to unravel where the fraud came from, what happened, and then for the first time, I heard about the phrase internet security.
Okay.
That,
Got
that
it.
was the first time I heard about internet security. This is 2003, 4, and 5.
Okay.
I heard the
Okay.
phrase
Well, those would have been
internet
the early days.
security.
Those would have been the early
The early
days of it,
days,
where things were
the
really
early
starting
days,
to go online, and all of a sudden it was like, hey, the stuff's
exactly.
online, but there's risks associated with it. So yeah, it probably didn't
Associated
even
with
have
it.
an official
Yes,
term, or it was just kind of starting up.
exactly. So it was internet security. Then I came across a Cisco security certification. I think that was the CCSP,
Okay.
Cisco Certified Security Professional. So I never took the exam because I was already CCNA. But I remember I began to read up the CCSP, and the basics of cybersecurity were taught in that material. I began to read and get curious, watch videos, think about security across the layers of across the OSI layers, and that started my journey. And then I grew to become a project manager within
Okay.
the telecommunication space. And then my love for cybersecurity grew. And somewhere along the line, I found myself around cybersecurity infrastructure deployment kind of projects more than the
Okay.
others. And over the years, I have experienced different kind of breaches, organizational
Okay.
breaches, data breaches for banks who were part of the networks I've been opportune to manage. And so those were the exciting moments. And the more I read and studied and observed the trend, I knew it was going to be a big thing in the future.
Okay.
By 2012, it was very clear to me that the cybersecurity at that time it was still called more internet security. There were
Yeah, I
other
do
names
remember
like
that.
yes, governance and compliance. Those were more the names that were being used. But there about 2012, some breaches in the financial sector back home in Nigeria made me know that there's something big in this. By the
Mm,
turn of 2015-16, it becomes so much clear that we needed to do more than what we did traditionally,
okay.
because scammers got things like phishing
Yep.
got totally out of hand, and all of that energy made me get so much interested, and for all the projects I had to do, subtle um, subtle signals. For example,
Okay.
cybersecurity is not compliance.
No. Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Compliance is very
Yeah,
different than cybersecurity, which people get mixed up. I think sometimes
thank
people
you.
hear cybersecurity and they think, "Oh yeah, that's like the compliance thing." And it's actually
Exactly.
not.
No, yeah, because I rolled out a compliance audit project in 2013, 14 thereabout. And despite the compliance, the audit went through very well. Then there
Okay.
was a breach. And I
Yeah.
remember the CFO of that company asking me, but we are compliant. We're very compliant. So, project manager, what happened? I said, yes, because you got the right door fixed according to specification and according to regulation of your country does not mean a thief will not attempt to come through that same door or even a window or even break down your
Yeah.
wall.
Well,
I
and
remember the
it's
look on the CFO's face like, wow.
and I think that's a really important call out as we start getting into these things, whether you're a executive in an organization or an individual, that like compliance to the regulations does not necessarily protect you from cybersecurity threats. Because to your point, it's like saying, well, I put a deadbolt on my front door, my house should be secure. And it's like, well, not necessarily. And especially with the way the technology is changing, just because something is in compliance does not mean you're impenetrable, which I'm sure you've seen that evolution, especially if you got into the space in the early 2000s. I feel like it was a lot less complex. I mean, there was still complexity back then, but it was a lot less complex. Not everybody was connected to everything. There were a lot less devices. A lot of software was managed on premises. You didn't have as much in the cloud. There weren't as many applications. So it was a little bit more contained. And so in the past, compliance still didn't protect you completely, but it got you further along than it does now. Now I feel like compliance is 10 steps behind because it's like, well, yeah, that keeps you compliant into this, but with the number of applications, the number of devices people are using, the number of different ways people are connected, it's massively more complex than it ever has been.
I agree. I agree.
Okay.
I agree.
And
And it's scary what's about to happen in the future.
yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about that, um, because I think I'm curious your take on this. But let's talk about the future in a couple of ways. So one, we talked just now about how the number of I want to talk about the overdependence piece because we can probably get to the AI thing a little bit about how that's probably also accelerating some of these things. But even over dependence, when we were backstage talking about this, we were talking about the fact that sometimes when we think about over dependence, we think about like screen time on our iPhone, where it's like, oh, yeah, I really should spend less time on TikTok or something like that. And I guess that's part of it. But when we're talking about over dependence, we're talking about a lot more than that. And I don't think people always realize how connected we are. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, people underestimate how connected we are. We are the hyper connected yet not concerned generation.
Okay.
We are the hyper connected. I call us the hyper connected generation, yet no concentration. I call us the hyper connected generation, yet not concrete. I mean, and everybody and anybody is one letter, two letters on your keyboard away from you. Yet there is no moment of personal meaning. There is no
Okay.
moment of personal meaning. There's no soul. Hi, just on the keyboard. Hi, and you have access to 5,000 people on Facebook like that. On LinkedIn, you have access to thousands of people like that. On Instagram, thousands of people like that. And yet you still have needs in your life, and you still don't know who to talk to. That's hyper connection, but no value coming through the pipes.
Okay. Okay. Well,
While
and I would agree.
connectivity,
Go continue.
yes, while connectivity is a blessing of this generation, what is the value we are transmitting? Are we really transmitting more humanity or more humaneness? Do we have, I mean, people are committing suicide and they were still seen online 5 minutes ago, 3 minutes ago, 2 minutes ago. They still got friends online, thousands of them. Yet we are not even connecting well as human beings. But let's even leave that. The bigger concern for me is the volume of opportunity, the use case for crimes that we're about to start having. The moment of the criminal, the moment where the criminal can have access to people's lives through or any other malicious personality, or the moment is about to balloon out of hands.
Okay. Well, and on this one, because I think that we can talk about this, but going back even to the piece of connectedness, because I love that you hit on the fact that we're hyper connected and yet completely isolated. And I definitely see that happening a lot, where to your point, we've got thousands of friends and yet we have no one to talk to, which, going back to the cybersecurity point, can make you extremely vulnerable, because in that isolation, it's hard to know who really you're engaging with, and it makes you vulnerable because you have a desire for that connectedness. But something else we talked about backstage was, and I just actually, as we were getting started, was thinking about this, the number of ways we are connected to the internet that we may not even think about. I think about like your Ring camera or your thermostat or your Apple Watch, or I think you mentioned backstage, even a lot of your medical devices that are now all connected to devices that before, I mean, they were static devices. They didn't have an internet connection, and all of that is changing. And is that, when you say the risks are ballooning, are those some of the areas that you're talking about specifically?
Yes. The fact that we are getting more connected and we're going to get more connected and we're moving the world in the direction of connectedness, and
Yeah.
yet the vulnerabilities are also increasing.
Okay.
We are now more vulnerable in very many ways. Very many ways. I mean, the Internet of Things will lead us to have the whole of your house online on your mobile phone. But that's okay for technology. I want to be able to see my sitting room, turn on my TV to my favorite channels I'm working in, have my room at a certain temperature, have my gas running already, have the food in the microwave that I put in there to thaw at a certain time to prepare. I can literally start cooking in the coming future before I enter the house.
No.
Women will be able to right in the
You
public
can. I
bus.
mean, I know
They'll
you can
tell
have your
Siri,
oven. You can have your oven connected to the internet and put something in there so that you can
yeah,
turn it on from your phone and cook your dinner without even being
yeah,
home.
yeah. I mean, you're supposed to cook for 2 hours or let's say 1 hour dinner, and you're able to shorten that to 15 minutes because you're done for 5 minutes while you're commuting on the train. That's
Yeah.
powerful. And that's good. We're about to see connectedness and all of that there, and it's going to get heavy. But however, we are also creating moments for the cyber criminal. The cyber criminal has opportunity to do larger interface of harm. The interface of harm, the interfacing area where we could be harmed, just went up in geometric or terageometric progression. We will not
It's
proportion
not just like a little
progression.
bit up.
Yes,
It kind
thank
of
you.
went like that.
Terageometric. Yeah, thank you. Arithmetic is what you expect. Geometric is leaping, but now this is going to be terageometric proportion and progressions. We're about to see cyber risks balloon out of hand. I mean, and it's scary because cyber literacy, which is not digital literacy or digital inclusion, cyber literacy starts from things like cyber awareness, to understand that the cyber environment and how it works, and how you can be cyberistically attacked, and what are the number of ways you can protect yourself, and what are the mechanisms available to that make sure that you're within the protection ring cycle of the cyber protection systems of your economy. That's what I call cyber inclusion. Now,
Okay.
cyber
Okay.
inclusion is far lower compared to digital inclusion. Digital inclusion is growing astro geometrically. I mean, something bigger than what I called it earlier, the Terra geometric progression thingy. Now we are moving in the cyber realms. I mean, we're going to have whole systems, whole cities that's going to be on the internet. I mean, you're going to have only one staff in water system, the water system of the future. Precisely there about 2050 or between 2050 and 2016, we're going to have a whole water system of a city that will be manned by one person.
Yeah.
Only
Well, and I
one
think this
engineer
goes
will man.
well, and I was going to say with this piece, what you're talking about, just so that people may be following who, might not be as technical, is to your point, there's this difference between being digitally savvy and having digital acumen and being cyber savvy and having cyber acumen. Because to your point, you're right. I have seen an exponential growth in kind of that digital inclusion where you even see this in the workforce, where, even in every function of the business, there are highly technical people who they understand the digital side of things and they understand, okay, well, if I'm in marketing, we have a digital marketing person that specializes in the digital side of things. In, finance, you have a digital finance person that's responsible for the financial tech and all this other stuff. But to your point, that's separate. And we can't assume that just because somebody's technically savvy, they have that cyber savviness, and that just because they understand the tech, they have an equal lens and skill set on understanding the risks associated with this technology. Is that kind of what we're getting at? Is the fact that, like, yes, there's this growing awareness of technology and skill around tech, but that doesn't the cybersecurity, the security side of it has not followed that same path of growth. Is that fair?
Yes, I didn't hear the last part. There's some glitch in the conversation.
Okay. So I was just saying that while we've seen a greater recognition and growth in people who are knowledgeable around tech and digital technology, we've not seen that same growth in people who are super knowledgeable and aware of the risks or the cybersecurity side of it. And so as a result, we've got all these people who are more connected than they've ever been. We have more people with the skills to implement new technology, add new technology, but we haven't necessarily kept up in saying, right, but who are I think you said it backstage, like, who are the police officers monitoring how this is being used and keeping an eye out for, hey, are we doing a good job of mitigating the risks associated with this? And so we're just exploding on the tech front, but we're not exploding on the like making sure we're doing it wisely and securely.
Yes, absolutely. And it's actually scary because what it takes to become a cyber criminal is just curiosity, a simple cheap laptop with a few dollars in your pocket, and the ability to cause havoc. That's all. But to become a cyber intrusion detector, cyber security analyst, cyber operating center, a specialist, whatever kind of skill set would take 6 months at the minimum and 2 years, in some cases 5 years. So when you have just one policeman, who we have only one policeman created over a 6 months period, and in the same 6 months period, we have 100,000 criminals. That's some issue for law. The peace of the state is threatened. The peace of the estate is threatened. So and now we're on top of that, we're now creating more
Right.
connections at rates that are insane. And we don't have and even the best AI machines, we still need competence for us to get used to them. The AI machine we need to learn. And the criminal also has power to actually employ AI machines too, to deploy AI machines too, to begin to guess. For example, for example, in the earlier days of hacking, it was about you trying to guess passwords. Now,
Yeah.
before you guess the password and press enter, let's say about a minute, you guess again, then press enter. You do social engineering. But now you feed parameters into an AI machine, and the AI machine just keeps trying every second. I mean, I've got a CISO friend who says his site is a CISO for a financial institution. He says his site is hit like 340,000 times in a minute. that is
Okay.
that is and one AI machine is streaming malicious signal to
Yeah.
his servers, to his firewalls, 340,000 times a minute. He said at times they can increase to 4 or 5. The day is coming when we're going to have more exploiting AI tools. Are we really
Yeah.
ready for the kind of connectivity that we are hyper connecting ourselves to? It's about to get all. Look, it's going to take me a while to guess your password. I'll think Chris. I'll add it to
Oh
Ofa.
yeah.
I'll check the name of your wife. But with one AI machine, I can come up with combination with a million combinations under a minute,
Yeah. Well, and
and I'll keep
that's
streaming
exact
and
that.
checking.
And the thing is, and I think this goes back to why, as we step into the AI age, these risks aren't just growing like this, because you hit on two really important factors, and one I chuckled at, because to your point, an AI criminal or a cyber criminal can be created like with little to no effort anymore. And it made me chuckle because I remember back to my early days when the internet was just coming out, and I would hack my friends' personal computers and just do silly stuff like open the CD-ROMs, or open different applications or shut them down. Right? And you did it, but I remember how time consuming it was, and the kind of social engineering I had to do to try and get them to download the exe file, and I had to sniff their IP address, and I mean it was quite a complicated process for me to do it. So to my friends from high school or whatever who may be listening, now what was going on when your computer was overreacting. That was me sitting in my basement. But I remember back then it took a long time to do that. And so you couldn't do that at scale. But now, one, the technology is a lot easier. I mean, I used to have to go into like the C prompt, and you'd sit and manually type all this stuff in. So you had to have a level of knowledge around code. You had to know what you were doing. There wasn't like Google to just look this stuff up. So there was kind of a threshold of skill that you had to get to be able to do it. Now, the technology, I could probably teach my 6-year-old how to do things 10 times more chaotic than I was doing back then. And then to your point with AI, well, now you train an AI model to do some of this stuff, and it can take it to a scale like never before, because it can move a million times faster than a human being, and it doesn't have to sleep or think or eat or anything. You can just literally train it to be like, just go, like you said, hit this financial institution and find a breach and just train it on it, and it'll just keep going at it.
And it's crazy. Think about a hospital where you have connected monitors, you have microchips, you have patient records, you have, I mean, someone, for everyone who has a pacer in their heart, they can be killed by a hacker.
Right.
That's scary.
And for every device that's connected,
And
that's a new vulnerability. So for every device, everyone now opens up something else that could be used to actually, get into the system. And then once you get access to the system, you've got access to the whole thing.
Yeah, I got a website a few weeks ago. That can get all the IPs of any device, the IP address of any category of device that's online. If you have a certain device online, all I need to do is to put the name of that device on that particular site. Then it gives me a list of all the IPs where that device, all the IPs of that device online all over the world, including the address, the geo positioning, the GPS pin location where those devices are. Now, that's
because
a
every
lot
IP
of
address
madness at once. It's going to give you all the IP addresses. Just for example, let's say it's a Sony camera, Sony Jeep, Sony something camera. Just put that Sony camera online, and all the physical addresses and the details of where those Sony cameras are connected online at that moment. That site is going to generate for me, reverse look up all the IP addresses.
Well, and again, and then from there, it is. And then on top of it, to your point, people don't realize that those IP addresses carry with them a lot of information. I mean, and really, when you start to think about, I mean, there's not only a ton of information.
Yes.
Go for it. What were you going to say?
Yeah. If anyone has your public IP, the IP address by which you log on online, we know what can happen. There's a lot that can be said. Where your devices are per time can be located. All the devices connecting through that IP can be located. If you have really serious problems with government, some of those devices can be reverse inverted, and so they can be watching you through those IP addresses. You can be watched through your phone. If the FBI, any of those guys, any of those security, don't let me mention names here now, they literally will tune in through your phone and listen to you, to your TV, and we are all online. Majority of our cable services are now coming through the internet. Majority of our telephony services are now coming through IP.
Yeah, it's crazy when you really start to think about it, because again, going back to it, I keep going down a trip of memory lane. But for those of you who've been around the block for a while, there was a time where you were only connected to the internet when you went and put that little thing in and listened to that 30-second annoying noise, bing, bing. And it was only when that was happening.
You dial in.
Right. You dialed in, and for those hours or whatever, you were connected to the internet. And then when your parents said, get off the computer, you were off the internet.
The logout.
And that was it. And when you came back on with a different IP address because you were coming through a different dial. Where now, basically everybody has this permanent device sitting in their house broadcasting a permanent IP address connected to basically every device in your house that again, it's like leaving your house wide open potentially and saying all my doors and windows are wide open for anybody who wants to come in and do anything.
It doesn't take a sophisticated hacker to come in through that your IP modem and see what's going on in your house. It's not very difficult to do. The only engine room between that not happening, the only wall is the IP company, the telecoms provider.
Okay.
That's the real wall. Those are the guys who secure the modems. Again, a lot of breaches can happen to those guys too.
Yes.
Of course, service companies like Google, Amazon, the big giants like Microsoft are investing a lot in cybersecurity to ensure that
Yep.
the devices and the softwares aren't vulnerable. But at the same time, we have like what I mentioned about PESA. Just imagine there's a particular version of PESA that they said needed software upgrade a few months ago. And a software engineer who I know was saying that this is bloody risky. That if a threat actor had located that particular vulnerability before the patch was done, I should just
Yep.
imagine how many people can die.
Yeah.
Just load the malware into the server when those spaces are connected, and that is the end of a lot of people all over the world using that
Yeah.
particular brand of PESA. So, like we said, if for example, I know Chris's uncle, your uncle lives in, let's say, Orange County. I know the name of the street. I go online and I put the type of PESA that his name is on. With a little bit of social engineering, I can trace the PESA because I'll see the IP address now from that side I told you. I'll see the IP
Yep.
address. And by that IP address, I can look up the address of where that IP address is physically. So on that street in Orange County, you know where your uncle lives anyway. So easily we can say this is Chris's uncle. And the 80-year-old man, his life may be cut short just because somebody had access to the brand of PESA, which is available on his medical record anyway, which probably is on his table in his house. There's a manual in his house somewhere. So it's getting how vulnerable we are in between social engineering and social re-engineering and social backward engineering, because you can actually trace someone and look at someone. You can go on my LinkedIn profile. I'm going to see all the things I've done. Go between Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. You see all my friends. You see where I've been. You see the chronicle of my life. You see at times you can even see how my emotions have been moving. Now you place all of that with some technical tools. Am I hyper vulnerable? Now there is nobody teaching people, for example, that there is what always leave personal identifiable information out of your posts.
Yeah.
People
Well, so
tag
that's,
everything. They tag when
I
they
know.
are.
I know. And like with certain social medias. And so this is where we're going to transition. I want to transition to so what do we do about it? Because if you've been listening to this, I hope you're not like curled up in a corner going, oh my gosh, now I'm thinking about all these things going, I'm just going to run through my house, rip the cord out of my modem and throw away all my internet connected devices, because it's not realistic. To your point, this connectedness in some ways is really bringing along a lot of positive innovations. A lot of really good things can come from this. But I think the point we're getting at is it's also opening us up to a lot of risk. And a big part of the problem is if you're not aware of the risks, you can't fight against it. You can't do anything to protect yourself. And so our goal with this is to say, hey, hopefully the first half of this conversation, you've started to be thinking about, oh my goodness, this is serious in terms of how vulnerable we are, because we really are vulnerable. And the example you just gave of somebody, I was reading an article the other day where it was talking about the fact that wars will not be fought with guns and ammunition, and I think we're kind of already at that. Wars will be fought through the internet, because to your point, you could unleash a cyber attack and turn off a whole city's pacemakers or a company's entire list of pacemakers and wipe out a huge population with the click of a button. And why would you go to the effort of trying to, get bombs and ammunition and guns and have to go in guns a-blazing and fight against militaries when from your computer or your garage, you can sit at a computer and with a few key clicks, execute mass chaos if you really wanted to. But I think the next part is, what can we do about it? Because Farhana, I appreciated your comment. I get it. And I understand that hearing some of this stuff can be a little intimidating and a little scary. And in some ways, why I was excited to have this conversation was I hope to actually freak people out a little bit and have them go, I am a little unsettled about this. Because to your point, if you don't know, you don't care. And if you don't care, you're not going to do anything about it. And you're just going to go along your business, connect more devices, make risky decisions, not thinking through the potential consequences. And you're also not going to advocate for your leaders, your organizations, for the tech companies to say, hey, you need to make sure if we're making these advancements, we are doing it thoughtfully and securely, because otherwise we are putting people in harm's way if we're not careful. So I kind of hope people are a little freaked out going, holy crap, this is serious. But now let's transition a little bit to what can we do to help mitigate some of these risks. And I'd like to approach it from both kind of a macro level and also a micro level of like on an individual level. But what are some of the things that you see that you say, hey, here's a way we can start to make steps to closing some of these gates and securing some of these opportunities?
There's need to accelerate cyber awareness at a terra geometric rate. Cyber awareness needs to grow very fast. And that includes all the elements of media. That includes making it popular media mainstream info. We have to have TV series, drama, radio shows, sponsored by corporate and by governments, making cyber issues popular. It needs to become a fad and a trend. It needs to become popular proceeding culture. We need to go very creative and put in the subconscious of the average individual that there are only two kinds of people and companies on the earth today: those that have been hacked and those that will be hacked. If you are fortunate to not have been hacked, prepare for the evil day. We need because in the school of warfare only the paranoid survive. Already we are paying very costly price with the lives of our children. Children are being bullied online. The dark web that should be kept out of mainstream economics, teenagers now have access on the streets. Telegram, I'm sorry, I'm coming up with some names. Telegram, for example, is where everything is happening. Is junior dark web. All sorts are happening there. People are asking crazy questions that you can ask on Facebook and on Instagram, and a family member or an uncle will not pick you up. But on Telegram, big stuff is happening. You won't believe how much drugs and those things are being done on Telegram. And there's some other apps that children are using that parents have no idea what it is.
Yeah.
If you see the kind of codes that young people, teenagers are now using on Snapchat and all of that, I mean, when you want to talk about dad, they say Poco is around. And if you, the parents, say, oh, who is Poco? Is that your new friend? No, they're referring to you, dad. That you, or they say, or you see a phrase like, I think something like, pay attention to your shoulder, meaning your parent is looking at you from behind.
Yeah.
And parents don't know that they are being referred to by their children by these names. So if you see the charts, you're like, okay, how are you? What was standing on your shoulder? You don't even know they're talking about you. My point is, we need to actually go drama. We need to actually use media and all the facets of our intelligence to educate society, to break into the subconscious of humanity that an epidemic is on the horizon. We owe it to ourselves.
So
I mean, I was go on.
finish your thought. No, finish your thought.
Okay. I was sharing how in the coming future a whole city will have only one officer manning the entire water system of a whole city, because everything will be interconnected. Water will come through the sewage, it will be purified, and then they will recycle. And the entire thing will be done online. God bless that city. If a hacker has access to their main computers, that's the end. Just mix, not too much, just a little bit of sewage, just a little bit of sewage in the water so that people don't fall ill immediately. In 6 months to 8 months, you can wipe out the city from an epidemic. You don't even know where it's coming from. What about our transport systems?
Well, and to your point with that one, and again, I'm trying to not freak people up, but also freak them out in a way. To your point, some of these things, if it's an intelligent hacker, they're going to be smart about it, where you're not going to do something crazy that people are going to notice right away. To the exact example of the water sewage treatment plant, you're not going to turn it so it's raw sewage going through the water treatment. You're going to tweak it just enough so that nobody notices, but all of a sudden 6 to 8 months later, people are dying, they're getting sick, and nobody really knows what's going on. And to your point, so anyway, two of the things you hit on, though, that I think are very practical to people listening or watching this, and this really hits home for me as a dad, is your kids. When you think about who are the most vulnerable, it's again, your like older generations, so parents, things like that, and your kids. And not saying that the middle generations aren't vulnerable, but they are very easy targets. That I think about the time I spend with my kids, like you said, not monitoring like in a draconian way, but like talking to them about, hey, what are you doing online? Like, hey, can I see what you're doing with this chat? Who are you talking to? And we've got rules that we establish with our kids of like, don't talk about these things when you're playing your games. You don't share this information with these kind of people. And so I kind of think back to when I was a kid. I don't know if anybody remembers this, but if anybody remembers DARE, and it was all about DARE to keep kids off drugs. And it was this huge campaign that I remember kids, you had t-shirts, there were commercials, there were all these things that was all about raising awareness to, hey, these are the kinds of things to be careful of. Watch out for this kind of stuff. Like, you know, be looking for all these different things in a way that was just drawing greater attention to it. And actually, one of the most effective ones that I remember was the anti-smoking campaign that I remember basically put big tobacco. I mean, it just knocked them back, where they really went on a media campaign about the risks of smoking. And it really shut down smoking and took it from kind of this mainstream, you know, you smoked on an airplane, it was no big deal, to all of a sudden it was like, oh, some people still did it, but it was nowhere near as big of a thing. But it really was kind of this guerrilla marketing to kind of just make people aware, not be ashamed of it, talk about what the real risks are, have open dialogue, talk about how it's constantly changing. And it really can be super effective. But I think you really hit on some important practical ways that we can, rather than sit in the corner and be like afraid of what's happening, going, well, no, like, that's why I was so excited to have you on. And I have another cybersecurity conversation in the queue talking about going deep on deep fakes and how to be prepared for what's coming with that. And how do you mitigate the risks with that? Because there's a lot of stuff that most people just are not aware of.
Yep. And yes, the media has a lot to do. The other part of the conversation is that we need to begin to produce cyber defense professionals, which are the good guys, at a rate that is sufficient to protect us from the hyper-connectedness syndrome that we are about to experience. We owe it ourselves to create more avenues for development, and there's need for huge investment in cyber defense AI mechanisms and systems at the level of government grants. Financial institutions especially need to create budgets around cybersecurity and cyber defense, significant budgets
Okay.
for R&D, for research. We can't escape this. We can't escape in the coming world. We can't escape these things in the coming days, months, and years. We just must prepare for it. The third thing I like to say is that our institutions of learning, schools, must have cyber curriculum. What has happened to tobacco is
Okay.
amazing. You can, I mean, tobacco has now, I mean, the menace is over in quotes. It used to be mainstream, and now we succeeded. In the same way, we need to combat this. The way the world came around COVID, the way the
Yep.
world came up during COVID, before the vaccines came, we need to do something because this is developing. Look, there are big issues. There's an adage in Africa, there's a proverb that says, it's only he that can see. An elder that can see is the one that is afraid. An elder that can see is one that's afraid. Some stuff is going on. Some very heavy storms are brewing. Some winds are brewing before the storm all over the world. Look, there's now crime as a service, where
Yeah.
cybercrime as a service, where you can invest 1,000, where people can invest £1,000 or £2,000 or X thousand. 10 friends can come together and begin to contribute money only for the purpose of buying malware and all those things and trying things out. If they succeed, fine. If they fail, fine. And they keep investing like that every month. Because think about it. If there are 10 billion transactions in the United States, you don't need more than 100,000 of that 10 billion transactions to actually become a billionaire. Look, if someone just gets a server that can withdraw $0.001 and does it over 1 million accounts, you probably won't know. Already, maybe it's even happening already, and you don't even know that that kind of money is being deducted. That's how people are investing. People are investing now because people want extra cash.
Yeah.
Now, how many people are aware within the PCI DSS world, which is the card fraud world, that 0.01 is being deducted from many cards all over the world, across all the platforms, and you don't even know because it doesn't affect you. But by the time someone deducts that from 1 million cards, or 3 million cards, or 4 million cards, and the amount of online transactions are about to drop, we need to begin to
Yeah.
educate people that please always calculate. When you collect your account balance and you do that thing at the ATM, always check for the zero, particularly after the third zero, 0.001. That's where the fraud is now. Check. Once you see
Well, because going back to the
consistency,
scale piece, and this was something that I talked with this other cybersecurity person with, which for those watching and listening, keep an eye out for that one. But we talked about this because of the scale. You used to have to go for the big fish, but you don't have to anymore because, again, you don't need to, because if you can, like you said, scrape that 0.0001, but you can do it 10 million times. It's like, well, if I can do that 10 million times in a day, I don't even need to scrape more than a penny out of people's accounts, and I can become a billionaire type of a thing.
and if you call 911, say, hello, 911 operator, I've been losing $0.0001. Look, the police all over the world have confessed that they don't have enough manpower to deal with cybercrime. Once the money is not up to 100,000 US dollars, it will be difficult for the police to move. The total number of crimes being reported in the cyber realms, even cybercrime division of many police installations. I'm not talking about Africa or the developing world. I'm talking about the developed world. I'm talking about the United Kingdom, the United States, Australia, Canada. It's a fact in cyber policing. In cyber policing, it's about $100,000. That's where it starts from. That's when they begin to think about deploying anything. So you can't even call 911 for 0.01. So some people, as we're speaking, some people are making easy peasy money. Easy peasy
Can
money
you
already
imagine?
from
Can you imagine if you
0.001.
tried to call your local police? I mean, if you tried to call your local police and say someone skimmed my bank account for a penny over the last 100, they just laugh at you and go, "What? Like, what are you doing? I don't have time for this," kind of a thing. But I think that hits
No,
on a really important.
They ask what you're on, Chris. They ask what you're on.
Yeah.
Say, what brand of weed are you on?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think we need to come check out what you're up to. But I think, to your point, one of the things you really hit on, and for those who, I know my audience is largely learning professionals, but also big, company executives. I think one of the big things with this is the investment in upskilling. And I think this is true for the next generation, but upskilling people in these skill sets to your point, to keep pace with this stuff. And there was a big movement in this in organizations on the tech front, where it was like, we need to upskill everybody in the organization around technology so they understand technology. But as we talked about in the beginning of this conversation, just because people understand technology does not mean they understand the security side of it. And that need to say, hey, we really need to prioritize professionals who really can be the cyber police, if you will, like you said. So there's enough police officers to actually do something about it, that are knowledgeable, that are skilled, that can actually lean into it. But in many ways, similar to like what we're prescribing in our schools, we should be doing that in organizations and really just societally, and saying, hey, we need people to have greater awareness to these things. They need to have the skills to know what to do, what to watch out for, how we can watch each other's back. And it's interesting, going back to something you said in the very beginning of this, you hinted on this in terms of how we're so connected yet so isolated. One of the big solutions to this is to be connected in the right ways, so that we're watching each other's backs, we're supporting each other, we're in many ways kind of linking arms and saying, hey, this is a real threat. This is not something, and it's interesting because in the United States, this year's an election year. And I can tell you, I don't know that I've seen any political articles talking about the importance of cybersecurity as a platform for the politicians, saying we need to do something about the risks that we're opening ourselves to as a country, as a nation type of a thing. But to your point, I think there's huge opportunity for us to do this. I think the other thing, and I'd love your take on this though, is you hinted briefly at this, in that you hinted at the diversity of tech. You talked about how, the UK, the US is very developed countries. But one of the things that I keep trying to continue raising the flag on is there's not enough diversity in tech, let alone cybersecurity, where we're thinking more broadly about some of these gaps, where we go, well, just because this is a problem in the US, those problems may look different in Nigeria, where you are, or in developing countries and things like that. And how are we accounting for that holistically? So I'm curious your take on kind of how we bridge that gap as well, because it's not just the tech elite kind of coming together and looking out for the best interests of, the big tech companies, but it's also some of the risks that may be missed on other fronts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I didn't hear the last part of the conversation.
So the last part that I was talking about was talking about the importance of not only cyber inclusion, where cyber is engaged in more things, but also the diversity of the people involved in cybersecurity. So we aren't looking at it just through like a one directional lens, where we're like, oh, these are the risks. It's like, well, yeah, those are the risks for this population or this group, but what about the rest of folks? And so I'm curious your take on that one.
Yes. We need cyber inclusion. We need to have more diverse professionals, more diverse people, more diverse representation within the cyber world. It's okay to have cybersecurity professionals, but if there is not enough diversity and inclusion in the room, some people will be underserved. Some people will be more vulnerable than others, and that's a very big risk. Remember, we are all now more connected. The weakest link principle is now about to hit all of us. The weakest link principle, because we are all now linked together. So we must work on cyber inclusion for underserved or underrepresented communities within the digital space. They also need to have their representation, because I mean, there are languages here in Africa that where do I start from? I can tell you 10 languages here in Nigeria that they don't have digital inclusion, but they have banking services.
Okay.
Now that's a big risk. How are we going to have cyber materials written in their own language? So they don't understand the English language. but they have a bank card. They have a bank ATM card. That's digital inclusion. That's financial inclusion right there. Good. But how do we communicate to them to be careful about their PIN numbers? How are we going to write the materials? How are we going to write the cyber materials to them? Who is going to interpret the material to them? That's why we need someone who is of that tribe and origin to actually be a professional in the cyber realm to help us with them.
Okay. Well, and I think to those points, one that is super, I'm very sensitive to this one. What scares me the most about where all this stuff is going and some of the risks is, you've mentioned this throughout, is it's often the most vulnerable people that are affected the worst by some of this stuff. You know, it's the folks that, like you said, they may not have, their language may be underrepresented, but they have a smartphone and access to apps and a bank card. And so they may not necessarily have access to all the other resources that other folks might. And as a result, are easier to exploit. And I see this again. I think about, again, as a dad, kids are extremely vulnerable. They're on video games, they're doing these different things. They don't have the contextual awareness or the wisdom or just life experience to recognize, hey, that person that's asking you these really personal questions or wanting details about these certain things, that might not be that, you know, peer of yours that you think it is, type of a thing. And it's very easy for those people to easily be targeted. And so I think, to your point, making sure that there is diverse voices representing the security conversation. So it's not just, oh, well, this is how we're thinking about it through this lens, because to your point, lots of people will be missed, and the people who will be missed are likely the most vulnerable, or at least at a much higher risk of being more vulnerable than the overrepresented populations.
Yeah, it's very important. It's a major thing. Those of us who are underserved must have representation so that the cyber materials, the awareness training programs, the materials can be rolled out in every single language on the earth that is necessary for people to comprehend, in every single language and form, which is why I mentioned media the other time. We actually need broadcasters who are cyber professionals, certified professionals to become broadcasters. We need script writers. It's a war that we are fighting. And I don't want to get this out of control to talk about how nations are fighting nations, and nations are breeding attack centers, cyber attack centers. Nations are breeding both biochemical attack centers and also information attack centers. There are nations, global powers are working on dominating the information world. Now there are other nations like my own nation where we don't even have a war strategy in terms of cyber. I mean, we are battling some bigger issues like trying to settle ourselves into common prosperity and peace and security across our borders, and having things like a good standard of living on our side. So how much can our government really invest in being a cyber superpower? And so I don't want to go. I don't want to go into the dark murky waters of how a country like Russia can decide to attack the financial sector in my country and begin to siphon $0.001 from everybody's account in my own country or any other African country, and we probably don't have it. I mean, the servers are European or American or Chinese or Japanese or Australian made anyway, which is what was happening with the Chinese boys who the West had to tell to go. I don't want to mention any brand on the show, but you know, some of us don't even know. I mean, a whole organization of African Unity had free servers in Addis Ababa given to them, and a particular country was listening to what African leaders were saying in their own private development moment. Now that's cyber slavery. That's a way. That's nepotism, and that's dominating Africa in a very, very cannibalizing kind of way. We don't even know that. Look, I'm speaking through an HP device, and so where do we start the conversation from to secure national interest of being a Nigerian when HP is an American company or a Korean company. You get what I'm saying? So we have
Yep, I totally
vulnerabilities
get it.
at a level that is actually somewhat melancholic, and governments of underserved or underdeveloped communities of the world, Africa and all other continents, or places where we need to develop our own indigenous solution because of national interest issues, so that we can be sure that we are safe. Because the servers we're using to connect, the satellite we're using to connect, the gateways we're using belongs to somebody in the West.
Right. And again, we could have a whole nother conversation about just this factor, but I think it further emphasizes how important it is for us to create awareness, to build skills in people globally, so that, to your point, instead of this dependence on all these other things where, again, it just makes you vulnerable. Because to your point, if you're an underdeveloped country that is, oh, this sounds, and we've seen this with social media, where social media is like, hey, we're just going to give you all this stuff for free. And it's like, but anything that's free, you're the product. So, like, what can come with these things? And I think that's the kind of awareness and skill development that can really help battle against some of these things, where we go, no, let's build up the infrastructure, the skills, the talent, the knowledge, and let's just go on a campaign to actually raise the tide, because ultimately everybody wins in this, and we start to balance the scales a bit. Because to your point, some of the scales are just getting so out of balance, and it's only going to get even more out of balance with the tech front. So I am so glad we had this conversation. And for Hannah, hopefully you don't move to Mars. Hopefully you don't feel like you need to move to Mars after this.
For Hannah, she's moving to Mars.
But I think there are some really practical steps that people can take. And so, while, again, part of the goal of this was to freak people out a little bit and go, holy crap, this is real and this is serious. Yes, it is. It is serious. It is real. It is something that every person, not just your cybersecurity officer or your, really techie neighbor, needs to be paying attention to. It's something everybody really should be paying attention to and going, hey, what can we do to raise our acumen, raise greater awareness, build the skills, build the next generation of people to help prepare us for this stuff. And so, this is one step, an important step in getting the message out there. So, David, I really appreciate you making the time. Like I said, you're on vacation, and here you came to talk about this. So thank you for doing that. And for folks listening, watching, share this episode, talk about it. Talk about it with folks. Talk about what you learned or some of the things. Ask questions, because to your point, the risk is huge. And we can't reverse it, but we can fight against it. I think there was a time, I came up the tobacco thing. There was a time where people were like, there's no stopping smoking. There's no stop. It's just too big. And guess what? We did it. We turned it. We fought against it. So we can do it. It's just, we've got to come together and be united in actually taking a stand against this in some really, really practical ways. So don't throw out all your devices. Don't delete the internet. I mean, I guess you can move to Mars, but then I don't know, I don't know how that'll work. But anyway, so thank you, David, for this.
Yes, I'm excited. And for I forgot, I think it's for Hannah, when she said she was moving to Mars.
Yeah, for Hannah.
I don't want to complicate the conversation. I don't want to complicate the conversation by saying that there's a whole new for Hannah. There's a whole new concern that there may be out of space aliens that may be trying to dominate our planet in the cyber realms. This is in the military circle. There's a whole new, energy around that. So that's dark humor for.
Yeah, we won't open that floodgate at the end of this conversation. Well, no, but seriously, David.
Awesome conversation.
Awesome conversation, and I so appreciate you making the time. And I really do hope that everybody listening or watching this, it's maybe freaked you out a little bit, made you think twice about it, but hopefully given you a bit of a path forward to go, okay, but this is something we can do something about, and we just need to work together to do it. And ultimately, we can see a better future if we actually take it seriously. So, David, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm excited. Thank you so much for having me. And we should speak again soon. Thank you so much, so much. I appreciate every single moment. And hopefully, this helps us to keep the world a safer place.
Yes. Yes. That is the goal. So thank you again. Thanks everybody for watching and listening. Hopefully you found this helpful and challenging and exciting, and we will see you on the other side.